one key topic here, the ecosystem of startup. I wanted to just share some information on that topic because a lot of people might heard about things, but we're not all familiar with some specific related to that ecosystem. So I thought it would be interesting for all of us here to share some knowledge we have on the topic. I'm not saying that I have all the answer. The idea here is just to share with you what I know from past experiences and current experiences. And from there, we can really see if everything is clear for everyone. And if there is any question, please feel free to ask, preferably at the end of the academy. It's way easier for me to handle it, to make sure that I stay on schedule. So yeah, thank you all for being here today. Just to give you a couple of words about me. So I'm a Christian. I'm a senior key account manager at Malt. As my colleague Arthur told you, basically we're a marketplace that's put in contact freelancers in the digital fields with companies all across Europe. And so far in 3 main areas, which is France historically, Spain, and also now in Germany. Before joining Malt, I used to work at AXA for a couple of years on data science related topics and on marketing related topics in partnership with Mercedes. And then I moved into the more, I would say, exciting parts of my function, which was to work with startups based in Station F and in all the ecosystem here in France. So that's how at first I was able to gather some information and to really be close to some of the biggest startups here in France and in Europe. The agenda of the day, I have several topics I would like to cover with you guys. First of all, I'd like to define what is a startup and what is not a startup, because there is some kind of confusion on the topic. And I want to make sure that when I say startup during the academy, we all have the same idea in mind. The second topic is to go through the different kind of business models that a startup can has. The third is to say that a startup cannot develop itself alone. It has to be surrounded by several stakeholders, private and public. Then I would like to give you an overview super briefly on some of the biggest unicorns in the world, but also in France and in Europe. And lastly, we'll go through some kind of example of how a fundraising works with a really concrete example of a fake company and a fake investor, obviously. And from there, we will have a break for question. And if we have more time to go into it, I have a special bonus for you guys. But I will just let you there, and you'll see at the end if we have some time to cover the topic. So first thing first, the definition of a startup. So there is different kind of definition of a startup. There is no one absolute truth about the topic. The one I'm taking is from Steve Blank. Steve Blank, which is the co-founder of the Lean Startup methodology. He's also a multi-serial startup co-founder and now a professor in different super prestigious university in the US. And what he's saying for him, a startup is a temporary organization designed to search for a scalable business model. And I would like to highlight 2 elements here. So the temporary aspect of it and the scalability aspect of it. First of all, if I step on the temporary aspect, startups don't last. What I mean by that is basically when a company is starting, obviously it's looking for sales. So sales at the beginning is really hard to find, and at some point revenue start to be generated. And at some point in time, the startup becomes kind of a bit mature, and it will go into more growth and hyper growth phase. And at that point in time, we're leaving the startup phase to go more into the hyper growth phase. And in that part, you are not called it a startup anymore. You're more a scale up and other kind of names, but you're really not a startup anymore. It's really, I would say, startups are words designed for really small companies, and companies such as Malt, which has a super high growth, are no longer startups. They're more into the hyper growth phase here, knowing that the next phase is really when you will be targeting, you will be having a couple of 1,000 employees in the company. So you will be getting really big with a lot of different services in the company, a lot of different departments, you know, just looking like a corporate, I would say. And at that point in time, in the maturity phase, either you go public, so on the stock market, or you stay private. But if you want to keep growing, you need to find some kind of new business lines or new products or services to keep growing, or basically you die. That's the way I see it. So a couple of examples here on the dying phase. Some of those you know are, for example, Nokia, Kodak, or BlackBerry, for instance. And then you have others that have been really successful when it comes to finding new growth opportunities, such as Apple, for instance, or Facebook and all the other GAFAs that you guys know, right? So really, when we say startups, it's really the beginning, and then we go into other phases of development. The second topic was scalability. And scalability, to address that topic, I want to first go into the traditional business model of a company. Let's say the company Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, it's a well-known brand and company producing sodas. And for that company, if I was starting the brand Coca-Cola, I would have a factory of production, right? So I would have some kind of fixed costs. And the more I will produce bottles of Coca-Cola, obviously, the less expensive the production will cost me, right? So basically, the average cost of production will go down. At some point, when my factory will be at full speed of production, I will be at the lowest point in terms of cost, right? And what happens is, if I want to produce more, I will have to buy a second factory, a second facility of production. So that will increase again my cost of production because I have more fixed costs in the company, basically. So I will have way more fixed costs than production, which means my costs will increase again. And at some point, obviously, I will start producing in that second factory and costs will be decreasing, which means that at some point, I will have again my costs going down. So in a traditional business model, what we call economies of scale usually goes into a wave. So it's highs and then lows and then highs and then lows. Whereas with a startup, it's super clear, it's just going down. Why? Because let's say you take, for example, Facebook. Facebook, if you have 100 million new users, the cost to have those 100 million new users is not that expensive. It's just, you know, a couple of servers, a couple of extra storage in the cloud, and everything is running, right? So it's really different compared to having to produce, you know, new bottles of Coca-Cola. Here, in a tech-related business model, costs just go down with the more users or products you have on that platform. And to be really concrete, I have two examples to give you from a tech company and from, I would say, a traditional company, Facebook and JP Morgan. So Facebook is one of the most valued tech company in the world, and JP Morgan is the most valued bank in the world. You can see the valuation, so around 500 billions for Facebook, 300 billions for JP Morgan. Facebook has 45,000 employees, where you have JP Morgan with a headcount of 240,000. And then in revenues, it's 70 billion versus 110 billions. What I want to explain you here is when you look at scalability, and when you look at cost going down, and when you look at profitability as well, there is one key metric that you can use to know how scalable the model is, and that's the revenue per employee. In this case, for Facebook and JP Morgan, you can clearly see that if you take the revenues divided by the number of employees in the company, Facebook is way more profitable than JP Morgan. right? It's because for a simple reason, the business model of Facebook is done for scalability and not the one of JP Morgan. And why so? Because as I said, if Facebook has 100 million new customers, is no big deal. It's just a matter of storage in the clouds. But for JP Morgan, if they have 100 million new customers, they have to open new bank agencies all over the world, right? Hire new people, so which means a lot of super extra heavy costs, fixed costs to add in the balance sheet, right? So that's why we can say really that Facebook and all the tech related companies are way more scalable from the start compared to, I would say, more traditional companies. So that was the definition of startup and the scalability part of it. That was phase one. And now that we know how we can define a startup, I would like to get to you with some kind of business model you see on the market. You will have mainly 3 business models for a startup: the SaaS model, the marketplaces model, and the consumer apps model. I will dive into each of those with concrete examples and also some key features you can have for each of those. First one, the SaaS model. Basically, it's a delivery model in which a centrally cloud-hosted software is licensed to customers via a subscription plan, which means, to make it simple, I pay a recurrent price to get access to some tech services, right? And from there, if you need to keep in mind a key feature, so if I create a SaaS company, or if I'm an investor who want to invest in a SaaS company, one of the key metrics I will follow is really the recurrent revenue. So either annually recurrent revenue or the monthly recurrent revenue. That's the key metric for a SaaS model. One of the key metrics. There are several, but that's one of the key metrics to follow. And the other topics are more, I would say, not optional, but less important, I would say. But here, if you have to keep in mind something, is really the recurrency of revenue provided by SaaS model. And some famous SaaS model that you guys all know, I'm pretty sure, Slack, for instance, Dropbox, Salesforce, DocuSign, and all the others. When it comes to the marketplace model, basically it's a website which enables interactions between sellers and buyers to optimize business transaction. And here, one of the struggle to begin with that kind of model is the chicken egg problem, which is to say, if I want to create a marketplace, do I need to focus first on the buyers and to attract buyers, or to focus first on the sellers and be sure I have sellers before going to buyers? I don't know if there is a really good answer to that question. Usually what people tend to do is to develop both sides at the same rate, so buyers and sellers, to make sure there is always a match between those two actors on the marketplace. Some key features you can find in that marketplace model, if I have to keep one in mind, is the GMV here. That's one of the key metrics for me as a founder or as an investor to look at a marketplace company, which is the gross merchandising volume, which is basically for Malt employees who are listening, is the transaction volume for us. But usually it's called in the ecosystem the GMV. And from there, how the marketplace makes money, obviously it's a commission-based model. So you take a cut on the GMV that you produce thanks to the buyers and thanks to the sellers. And some famous marketplaces on the planet are obviously Malt, one of them. You have Uber, you have Le Bon Coin, you have Craigslist, you have Medium, you have Etsy. There's so many. Some more famous than others, but yeah, there's really a lot of them. And so we have seen 2 first models. The first is the SaaS, the second is the marketplace, and the third is the consumer apps model. This one is dedicated to mobile apps made to improve people's individual lives in different aspects. And you can find those apps obviously on stores such as Apple and the Google Store. And here, one of the key metrics to follow as a founder of an app or as an investor is the daily active user that you can see here. Basically, that key metric defines the traction, the velocity at which I'm getting new users that will use my app on a daily basis, right? And obviously, the more I have daily users, the more my startup becomes valuable because I'm showing to external partners that I have a product that interests people. So the higher it goes, the better it is for me, obviously. And in those kind of apps, how can I make money? You have different ways, but I would say two main. The first is you will have in-app purchases. So for instance, you can buy some kind of services or product in the app itself, or it's an ad-based model, which means you will see some kind of advertising within the app, and that's how obviously those guys are making money. And to give you some kind of example here, I'm pretty sure you guys all know all of those: Instagram, Messenger, Lydia in France, TikTok, all over the planet, and Spotify are part of those. But there's so much more consumer apps as you know it. So that are basically the three key business models that you can have for a startup, which is tech related and which is scalable, obviously. And then I told you, like, a company, a startup cannot develop itself alone. It has to be surrounded by partners and different kind of partners that each have their own function. And I would highlight here 4 key different partners: incubators, accelerators, startup studios, and financial partners. Let's start with the easy one, the incubators. Incubators are entities, either public or private, dedicated to help you as a founder build the right foundation for your company. And incubators usually accept you as a founder when you just have an idea or when you just have a business plan. So it's really the beginning of the project, the beginning of your company. Nothing is really, I would say, concrete yet. And they will help you during up to 2 years. They will help you with providing you office spaces, advices on the legal aspect, on the business planning, on prototyping, and so much more. And in exchange of all those services, they will take a monthly rent out of you, obviously, because you're renting their space. So that's the way they usually get their money back on the different startups their support. Then in contrast with incubators, you have accelerators. Those guys are way more, I would say, tricky, because if you want to get into an accelerator, you have to have an MVP, so which is a minimum viable product. So at least show that you have something that customers want. The application process to get into an accelerator can be quite competitive in function of the reputation of the accelerator. And then they will support you for 3 to 6 months with super rigorous planning, because they're there to really accelerate your growth and really help you skyrocket. And when I say support, they'll give you, industry expertise. So they will be working with different field experts in sales, design, tech, data, and all the others. Also help you with funding, with mentoring, and a lot of different topics to help you grow, basically. And on their side, how they make money is they usually take some part of equity in your company, because the idea for them is to say, if the acceleration goes well and the startup is a success, the accelerator will get a lot of money back from you because they were the one helping you to acquire that growth to start with. So that's the kind of 2 business model we can see between incubators and accelerators. And then more concretely, I can give you some examples here. It's mainly France-related examples. I'm sorry for international people listening. You will have, for example, Numa or The Family or The Village by Crédit Agricole. For incubators, you also have accelerators, so such as Techstar, which is a famous one, YC, which is also in the top 5, I would say, and 500 startups, for instance. I have put also Station F. Station F itself is not an accelerator. In my mind, it's more the different, companies within Station F that are doing acceleration programs, such as for an example, you will have, I think, HEC having an accelerator in Station F, L'Oréal, LVMH, and all others big brands who really have their own accelerator program within the Station F building. So I want to maybe dive a bit into YC, so Y Combinator. For those who don't know, YC is known as one of the best accelerator in the world. It's basically Harvard for startups. And why is it so well known and why it has so much a good reputation? It's because YC is at the forefront of major unicorns that you guys know all over the planet, such as Airbnb, Dropbox, Front, Docker, Twitch, Algolia as well, Zapier, Wembley. There are so many companies that have been through YC and then that became super famous, that raised a lot of money and that are just super massive right now because they had the opportunity to be supported by one of the best ecosystem and one of the best provider of services for startups. So basically, yeah, that was for accelerators. And then I told you also about startup studios. Startup studios, for those of you who don't know it, basically it's studios, small studios designed to build several startups in succession. So what they do, more concretely, they will find a founder, which is a CEO. They will also find a CTO, so they will have 2 co-founders. They will tell them, there you go, here is an idea. We will give you some money, we will give you some support. So on the marketing side, on the finance side, on the tech side, on the data side, on the design side. And we want you guys to be able to develop that product and that startup into really a concrete project with customers. And so obviously, since you have 2 co-founders, the CEO and the CTO, they will get equity in the company, but the startup studio will also get equity in that company because they are the one providing all the supports the 2 co-founders need to be able to develop their company. And among the most famous startup studios, you have 2 of them here, which are Rocket Internet, so German-based, and eFounders, French and Belgian-based. So Rocket Internet is really famous for copycating existing, well-known, startups and opening new startups as a copy in countries where there is no one, with the idea that at some point, that famous company will come and buy them. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say tomorrow, we're going back to 2008, right? And in 2008, 2009, Uber was created. And let's say I create Uber in the US and I'm starting to get a lot of traction in the US. I become the #1 player in the US and I want to deploy in other countries. What Rocket Internet was doing back in the days, and I think still now, was to say, okay, we see that Uber is super active in the US. They are not yet in Europe. Let's find 2 people, a CEO and a CTO, ask them to create the Uber version of Europe. And at the end, what we want to do is to develop super fast the European market with our startup, the copycat, with the idea behind that at some point, if Uber want to deploy into Europe, they will just buy us out. And so Rocket Internet will make money because they were part of the shareholders of the startup, but also the two co-founders and all the others, I would say financial partners who invested in that startup will make money. So that's basically how Rocket Internet used to work. And e-founders, kind of the same. Basically, they take equity, they find two people, founders, CEO and CTO, and then they have to develop their own company. To give you some example of companies created by e-founders, you might know them actually. Obviously, Spendesk, we use it here at Malt, as you guys know. There's also Forest Admin, Hy-Vee, that has been bought by another company. I don't remember which one. Aircall, super famous one as well. Mailjet, Textmaster, mentioned in France. All are part of eFounders portfolio. And really the vision of eFounders is to focus on the future of work and more especially SaaS model dedicated to future of work. So that's why you have so many of their companies that are related in some ways to the way they can provide added value to other businesses. So that's all about the startup studios so far. And the last part, as I told you, is the financial partners. Financial partners, it's a more tricky part for a couple of reasons. First, because you have financial partners that can come into play at different stages of maturity of a company, of a startup. You have partners that will come into the seed rounds, other that will come into more the early stage, the later stage, IPO, and so on. So to be more concrete, for example, in the seed phase of the company, when you're looking for funding, you will go to business angels, but also to friends and families, right? Because you're not raising that much money. When I say that much money, is around like from 0 to maybe €1 million, which is a lot. Totally agree with you, it's a lot. But compared to other rounds you can do, is not that much. So once you are into early stage and later stage development phases, if you want to raise money, you will go and see VCs mainly, or you will try to acquire or merge with other companies, or you will develop just strategic alliances with other partners to be able to keep growing. And at some point in time, when you are mature enough, if you want, if the founders are willing to, and if the financial partners who invested in the company are willing to, the company will go in IPO, which is saying that they will be listed on the stock markets, just like Facebook, Airbnb, Uber, WeWork, and all the others. And from there, basically everyone can become a shareholder in the company, because since the stock of the company will be traded on the stock markets, if I want to buy a stock, I totally can do it. No big deal. And I was saying, when you're looking for funding, those funding rounds are linked to the maturity growth. What I mean is, at the beginning, obviously, you're not raising that much money because you don't need that much, and you don't have enough traction to justify the fact that you might be raising 100 million. So you're not raising a lot at the beginning, and the more you grow, the more you need to raise to keep up growing. Obviously. So for instance, as I said, in the seed rounds, usually you raise up to €1 million. And then in Series A, it goes from 1 million to 5 million. It really depends, but it's around between 1 and 5 million. Series B, it's between 5 to 30 million euros, or some kind of around those numbers. And then from Series B to higher, you can go up to 30 million, 100 million. There is really no limit. And there is also no limit in terms of rounds you can do. To give you an example, when Uber, before going public, Uber did 24 funding rounds, which is a lot. And in total, they raised, I think it was 24.7 billion US dollars. So there is no limit on the money you can raise. It totally depends on your maturity, your growth rate, and other KPIs that are super followed by investors. And that's about it, I think, for that section. Yes, just a quick focus on VCs, because I found it super interesting for people asking questions beforehand. Basically, all the VCs don't have the same reputation. You have those who have really good reputation and others don't. Those who have super good reputation compared to others are the vanilla VCs here. Among Serena Capital that you guys know at Malt, Idea Invest as well, Isaïe, Daphne, Breda, for instance. But you also have international VCs now who are coming in France because they have seen that the ecosystem is super mature. And I'm thinking of a couple of super famous international VCs, such as here Index Ventures, Accel Partners, Firstmark, Balderton, Benchmark, Union Square Ventures as well. So that's UK-based VCs or US-based VCs coming in Europe and more especially in France, because they see that there is opportunities of investment here. Then you also have corporate VCs, because some companies want to be part of the startup ecosystem, and so they create their own financial structure to be able to support founders. And you have, for instance, Orange, SAP, you have Salesforce, Sodexo, and all the others as well, each having his own fund with his own investment criteria, his own investment thesis. It really depends from one another. There is no real absolute truth when it comes to investing. And I think that's about it. So basically we covered the incubators, accelerators, startup studios, and the financial partners that goes from, friends and family up to IPOs and stock market. The next section here, I wanted to focus, since we were talking about, IPOs and stock markets, I want to focus really quickly on the biggest companies, tech companies in the world nowadays, but also in Europe, just to let you know how things are moving across the world. And first, I'd like to give you the definition of a unicorn, just to make sure we all think about the same thing here. A unicorn is a privately held company, your valuation above $1 billion US. And the word privately held, it's super important here, because if you are a listed company, so if you're a company on the NASDAQ, on the CAC 40, on the Bell 20, on the IBEX 35, you're no longer private, you're public. So you cannot be a unicorn. Here, I'm really targeting and I'm really focusing on those companies who are super massive because they're valued super high, but who are still private. And so the top 10 in the world are those ones. So it's mainly China and the US, as you guys can see. The biggest one being ByteDance. ByteDance, for those who don't know, is the headquarters, so the parent company of the app TikTok. As you might all know, TikTok, the famous video app. Didi, the number 2, is the Chinese competitor of Uber in China. The third company, Juul, it's an e-cigarette company. Not pretty sure what it does here in that ranking, but yeah, it is. Then you have Stripe, so fintech related company, Airbnb, SpaceX, and all the others. I don't know all of them, but at least you have a clue on who are the biggest ones in the world. And then you have the ones in Europe, because we're doing a great job as well. So you have Monzo, which is from the UK, it's a fintech, obviously Deliveroo, Cabify in Spain, Sigfox in France, Glovo in Spain as well, Revolut in the UK, TransferWise in the UK as well, BlaBlaCar in France, N26 in Germany, Babylon Health in the UK, Auto1 in Germany, and Doctolib here in France as well. Just to let you know, it's not all the European unicorns here, it's just some of them. I know there are so many others, such as Dataiku, for instance, in France. But here, just an overview of some of those unicorns. It's not an exhaustive listing of all the unicorns in Europe. And that's about it. I hope it was clear. I think so, but just to make sure. And the last part here I wanted to cover with you today is the process of fundraising itself. While talking with a lot of you guys, I had the feeling that it's not always clear how the fundraising works for a company. It was not clear for me as well. So I had to read a lot on the topic and make it quite simple to understand. So I hope my example will be clear. If not, I'll be disappointed, but we'll see how it goes. So first of all, before going into the fundraising part, we have to ask ourselves one question, which is, how does an early stage investor value a startup, right? And to answer that question, I would say it depends. It depends on several factors. Why? Because if you're a startup, you have little revenue or no revenue at all. So we cannot apply the same valuation methods as the one we would apply for Coca-Cola, for BMW, for Mercedes, because those ones have growth and sales and financial metrics to follow. So for a startup with no revenues, you need to apply some other criteria which are really specific to the tech world. And some of those criteria can be, for example, the sector in which the company is evolving, also the different exits that the market, that industry has known, the willingness for an investor to get a premium to get into the deal, the level of desperation of the entrepreneur looking to raise money. That's some of the criteria, but there are so many other criteria. And one of the most important, obviously, as an early stage investor, is also to look at the founding team itself. So who are those co-founders? Are they complementary in terms of, skill sets? Are they really executing a lot? So how is the traction when it comes to the product itself? How they know each other, who owns how much in the company, did they know how to handle fights, because when you start a company and all day long, but you can fight with your co-founders. So investors need to know if you're able to have a conflict with your co-founder and still keep on working with them. So there are so many factors. I don't know all of them because I'm not an investor, but if we have investors on the academy, please let us know at the end what you think about it. So first, you need to value that company. And let's say you want to make a proposition as an investor for the startup because you value them at a certain level, right? Let's say 1 million euros. If as an investor, I want to give a formal proposition to the startup, what I would like to do first, obviously, is some kind of due diligence. The due diligence here is basically a formal process by which you will investigate and make sure that the company you want to invest in is legitimate, is legally secure, and comply with all the regulation, and basically that everything that the founders told me as an investor are true when it comes to the metrics of the company and so on. So first, I'll do my due diligence to make sure that it's not a scam company, for instance. And once I decided that it's not a scam company, it's a real company, and I trust them and I want to make them an offer, I will prepare what is called a term sheet. So it's a formal document that is used to give the condition at which me as an investor, I will get into that company as a partner, financial partner. So that paper, that term sheet usually says, I will give you X money for X percentage of the company with those conditions, right? And then is the role of the founders of the startup to decide whether or not to accept that term sheet, knowing that usually when you're raising funds, you are road showing several funds, VCs. So you might have several term sheets, one per VC usually, and then you need to decide which one to go with. And obviously, once the term sheet is accepted, me as an investor, I will become part of what we call the cap table of the company, which means I will be owning concretely some part of the equity of the company itself. So the cap table is really the table or the spreadsheet that defines who owns which part of the equity in a company, to make it simple. So if I take a concrete example, with a fake company, a fake investor, and some fake co-founders. There you go. The company here, it's called Mixello. Mixello has 2 founders, and so far they have 0 investors. Let's say the founders A has 500,000 shares, the founders B the same, which means in total we have 1 million shares. And each of the founder obviously has 50 and 50%, right? And at some point in time, those founders, they want to raise money because they want to develop their company, they want to hire, they want to open new markets, etc., etc. So they will go and ask the opinion of several VCs on what is the valuation the VC is putting on the company. And let's say one of the VC, the investor, tell them that the company is valued according to him $1 million, right? And that's the value the investor is giving before putting his money in the company, right? So let's say I'm a VC and I say, okay, that company is valued according to me at $1 million, right? So now, since I know that the company is valued at $1 million, and I know there is 1 million shares in the company, I just set the price of each share to obviously $1 per share, which is important to keep in mind for the rest of the exercise. So now we know that each share has a price of $1. And from there, the thing is, as an investor, I need to get also shares because I will be part of the cap table of the company. So the company, Mixello, need to issue new shares. And they need to know how many new shares they will be issuing to me. And that's where we will do a bit of computation here. And we will start with keeping in mind the old share price of $1. And let's say, as an investor, I want to put $250,000 in the company, which means that the new valuation of the company go up by 250,000. So it becomes 1.25 million, the valuation of the company. And I know as well that since I know that's new valuation of 1.25 million, and I have so far, before me getting involved, we had only 1 million shares. If I divide the new valuation of 1.25 million by the number of shares we had, it gives me the new share price of $1.25 per share. Okay. And then from there, since I know the new price of each share, and I know as well, I want to invest $250,000 in the company. If I divide $250,000 by $1.25 per share, I get the new number of shares that will be issued by the company and given to me as an investor, as a proxy for the investment I'll be making. And if I summarize everything here and I show it in the table, there you go. You have still founders A having 500,000 shares, founder B the same. The investor now has 200,000 shares, right? So which give 1.2 million shares in total. Then what happened is, since we know the new share price of each share, and we know the number of shares per person, we can define the value of the shares of each person. So it's 500,000 multiplied by 1.25 here. And the same for that person here, the investor. So we have a value here of 1.25 million, as we said, which is a new valuation of the company. And finally, when it comes to percentage ownership, obviously, we used to have 50% and 50% and zero. Now, since the investor came into play, he has some part of the company. So those two founders have been diluted by around 8% to be able to give him that 16.6% as a newcomer in the company. So the cap table here, now, instead of just having 2 people, it includes 3 people, and each having that amount, that percentage, sorry, and that number of shares in the company. And that's how basically dilution works. And the more you will be raising funds, the more new investor will come, and the less percentage usually the founders will have in the company, because they need to let go shares and also a percentage to be able to raise new funds to develop their company. And I hope it was clear. If not, I will come back to it if you want to. But so far, that was it. So thank you all for listening. And there you go. Now it's time for questions. I don't know if you have some questions, some remarks, some feedback. So feel free just to let me know. There's the chat box here.
Yep, thanks a lot, Christian. If you have any question, you can ask in the chat, or if it's sometimes it's a bit complicated to write what you think, so you can raise your hand, and I think I can try to give you like the possibility to talk if you want.
So I have one question for Martin. Where can you get the presentation? Basically, the presentation is, I will send it to you if you want. You can just send me a mail. It's Christian at malt.com, and I'll send it to you, no question asked.
So we have now from Julie, if Christian, you can explain the calculation, the one with the slide before, I think. Yes, if you could explain again how you can calculate the process.
Yes. So to come back to it, up there you go. Up there you go. So up. So basically, if you go from here, so as I told you in the beginning, each of the founder has 500,000 shares. And what I do is I multiply those 500,000 shares by the new share price to get $625,000, which is the value of the shares owned by each founder on the new valuation. So yeah, that's how I did the process. And yeah, the same for the investor. So he has 200,000 shares, and you times it by 1.25 US dollars, and you get the value of his shares in the new valuation.
Okay, I think she meant that in USD it was 1.5 million and not 1.25. I think the new valuation. If we had
Oh yeah, my bad. I'm sorry. Yeah, Julie,
I think
you're
that's
right.
just it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a computation mistake. My bad. I'm sorry. I guess.
Yep, no problem. Question from Despina: are there any incubators that don't charge money, like governmental?
I really don't know, to be honest, to be transparent. Usually, incubators need to get funded, because otherwise, if they give you services for free and they don't have any advantages of helping you, they will not run for a long time, because they need to be able to pay also salaries of the people running the incubator, And if they cannot get any money from you guys, it's really complicated for them to survive more than a couple of months, right? So maybe they are in the market, maybe in France, maybe in Germany, I don't know where, but usually they will charge you because they need to survive as well, just like any other company.
Cool. Can you see the questions, Christian? Or we have one from Roxanne to have more details on Startup Studio and Accelerator. What's the difference in a Startup Studio could be an accelerator at some point?
Can a Startup Studio be an accelerator? If you think about it, a Startup Studio is indeed some kind of accelerator. Why? Because the thing is, they are building a new company, and since they want to develop it as fast as possible in order to grow and raise funds and make it big and then have an exit at some point in time, obviously a Startup Studio by essence, I would say, is an accelerator because they want to go super fast. And they also take, as you have seen, equity in the company. So they have a lot of similarities with an accelerator. But the main difference is an accelerator will not produce his own startups compared to the Startup Studio, which has, by definition, to produce his own startups. But then the rest of the process is kind of the same because they get equity, they support you with different aspects of the business, and then they want you to be as fast as possible in the development of your company.
Yep, thank you, Roxanne, for the question. Christian, if you still have time, we have another one from Henry. Can you buy shares in a company that is not looking for investments?
Wow, usually not, because if you're not looking for investment, then the cap table is fixed and there is no point of opening the cap table if there is no money needed. Maybe Nicolas, he's not here, but maybe you should ask it to Nicolas, to be honest. But I'm pretty sure if a company is not looking for new money, they will not accept money just for the sake of money, right? And what happened also is, keep in mind that there is a lot of people who want to invest small amounts in some startups in different companies in Europe or in the world. And the thing is, as a founder, it doesn't make any sense for me to accept maybe, I don't know, 5,000 euros if I want to raise 20 millions. Why? Because I will add you in my cap table. And at some point in time, you just become a liability, you as a small investor, because you are asking me to give you reports, you are kind of my boss. But compared to VCs who are putting maybe 10 millions in the company, you are just putting a small amount. So you're more a liability than really someone that can add value. So usually that's why when companies are raising funds, they're targeting some kind of investor, and usually they avoid having private individuals as investors.
Okay, perfect. That was not Henry from Malt. So for
my
the
bad.
ones
My
who
bad.
don't know Nicolas, it's our CFO. So we have one from Hugo. If we have BSPCE and we get out of the company and exercise it in 2020, there is a new round in 2021. Can we sell our BSPCE easily when there is the new round, or do we have to wait for an exit?
Okay.
I don't know if you know this one. But...
I know a bit, but the best person again is our
yes, our CFO.
the CFO the CFO of your company. But how it works is at Malt, for instance, you have 4 years of vesting, and after those 4 years, you can acquire your BSPCE, so you can exercise your option of buying those BSPCE. And from there, you can obviously, you become a real shareholder of the company. But for further information, I would advise you to go and talk to your CFO. I don't know in which company you are, but totally your CFO should be open to explain you how it works if you want to get into a new funding round.
Cool. Question from Elga. In any case, do you know how long investors give in average, like how much time to have a profit? Because some of the famous startups we cited in the presentation took a very long time.
I really have no clue, to be honest. I'm not a VC. I cannot tell you that.
I guess it depends on all companies, because like I know we talked about Spotify, for example. I think they're still not making any profit at the moment. So I guess it really depends on every situation.
I have another example for Elga, I think. It's Amazon. Amazon didn't make any profits before, like, I think 20 years in business or something like that. So how they were selling their vision to the investors was to say that we really first focus on developing our business. So all the money we're making will be put back into the business. So there will be no profit for you, their shareholders, so their investors, because we want to really develop ourselves as the best customer service company in the world. So there is no really timeline on the duration after which the investor will ask you to give them a return. It totally depends on the relationship you have with your investor, with your co-founders as well, the kind of business model you have, the market, and so many other factors.
Perfect. So we have another question from Denis. Do you have names of startup studios in France, like examples? Do you know any?
Yes, there is. So eFounders, first one. Second one is Possible Future. Its former name was French Bureau. And I have a third one in mind, which is created by Crédit Agricole, which is La Fabrique by CA. And I think you have a couple of others, but that's the three I have in mind in France.
Okay, so, and we have that question from Victorien. Did Malt use one of them at the beginning, like incubator, accelerator?
You will have to ask that question to Vincent and Hugo, who are the Malt co-founders. I'm sorry, I don't have that answer. I wasn't there back in the days.
I don't think so. I think like we were at Razorfish at the beginning,
yeah.
but it was just more like a co-working space, I think, than really incubator and accelerator. So I would say no. But yeah, we might ask to our co-founders. What's your opinion, Christian? It's the last one. If you have like 1 minute, what's your opinion on the startups and scale-ups who raised hundreds of millions euros at like in one single round?
I cannot say, like, it depends which company you're referring to. Why? Because some companies need to raise a lot of money super fast in the beginning, not because they're willing to raise that money for their own purpose, but also because sometimes it's mandatory on a legal point of view. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's take Alan, for example, or Kento, the neobank here in France. Alan and Kento, super quickly in their growth maturity phase, raised, I think, between 20 and 40 million euros. The thing is, they raised a lot, that's true, super fast, that's true. But it's because, for example, in the case of Alan, since they're a real insurance company, they need to be able to have some kind of capital locked in their balance sheet in case they have to manage some claims, some customer claims, right? And that's some kind of money that has to be raised and blocked in the balance sheet, so not being used outside of claims management. And that's why outside of just raising the money to develop the company, they also had to add in that funding round the money asked by the government, the legislature, to be able to support themselves in case there are claims to manage. So raising a lot of money super fast doesn't mean anything. It really relies on which company it is, in which sector, who are the founders, how big is the market moving. There are, again, so many factors that comes into play.